The projection of police power, tensions rise in the nation's capital over checkpoints, and how long the federal takeover will last. We talked to one of the officials in charge. There is a saying, if you're not at the table, you are on the menu. Ukraine is not at the Trump-Putin table tomorrow. Analysis from former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton. Dodgy numbers from DOJ? Big advertised taxpayer savings may, in the end, be off by a beltway mile. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Let me welcome you to the Takeout. I have lived in Washington, D.C. since 1991. I remember that first year in this city very well. For my career, it was nonstop exhilaration. As a resident, however, there was a different kind of rush. It came from a gnawing fear of violence. 504 people were murdered in Washington, D.C. that year, 1991. It was the highest rate ever. And for context, the murder rate in the nation's capital hovered for years around 400, and it didn't fall below 300 per year until 1998. The number of murders in D.C. in 2024, according to statistics cited by the Trump White House this week, was 186. To review, my first year in D.C. in 1991, 504 murders. Last year, 186. And we are now led to believe, in President Trump's words, that crime in D.C. right now is worse than it's ever been. When I moved to D.C. in 1991, there were straight-up no-go zones, places where cabs, remember, this was before Uber and Lyft, simply would not travel, not at any price. The city existed in a kind of numb terror. It functioned. People shopped, went to work, played in parks, but uneasily. Fast forward to last year. When this show was still America Decides, I was absent for 5 weeks. I served for 5 weeks on a D.C. criminal grand jury, reviewed evidence and cases for possible prosecution. Victims sat feet away from me in that grand jury room, trembling in fear from what they had been through: robberies, muggings, carjackings, shootings, and worse. I stared into the haunted eyes of crime victims in this city. Statistics about crime trajectories, up or down, are meaningless to an individual victim. The victim shudders over what happened to them, not whether that crime is on an up or down annual arrow. But statistics are important to a society, to a government seeking proportionality and assessing priorities, where to focus, what to do, for how long, and how do you measure success? How do you improve safety and preserve a sense of being? Here's a question. Do federal checkpoints for seatbelts accomplish any of this? Well, there was one last night here in the nation's capital. It drew protests from bystanders and disbelief from people inside their cars. Crime happens in Washington, but as the stats the White House posted this week clearly show, homicides in this city are down 30% from 2023. So by definition, things here cannot be worse than they've ever been. Justice Department reporter Jake Rosen joins me now. Jake, tell us what happened last night here in the city.
Sure. So we saw FBI Director Kash Patel announce this morning that the administration across its federal law enforcement officers had made 43 arrests, but 29 of those were immigration-related arrests, which means that the administration, in its capacity of using now federal law enforcement officers to conduct, whether it's these roadblocks, DUI, or car checkpoints like you kind of pointed out, or throughout other law enforcement activities, have kind of expanded what we initially saw in the first 5 or 6 days of this, especially now that there is increased National Guard and law enforcement throughout certain parts of the city, to expand that to immigration arrests. And we saw the D.C. police chief today, Pamela Smith, announce that her administration and her department for the first time is going to be helping, not fully because there are certain D.C. laws that they cannot skirt around in this situation, but going to be potentially providing transportation for illegal immigrants who are detained by the Trump administration and these federal law enforcement from place to place, or potentially at one of these traffic stops. Like you just pointed out, if you see somebody is here illegally and you find information or believe somebody to be, you can then report that to ICE, which has never been done before in this city since those laws have been passed.
In essence, closer cooperation on this immigration approach. Where is the mayor of Washington, D.C., best as we know, Jake? Because this seems like a pretty fraught moment for the city.
Oh, it's certainly a fraught moment. And I think everybody's on the edge of the toes waiting for some kind of response from her. Well, tonight, her office tells CBS News in a phone call earlier before this that she's actually in Martha's Vineyard tonight. For a personal reason. She said there was a personal commitment that she had to make and that she will be back in the district tomorrow. Certainly on the summer Thursday going into Friday, questionable timing. And given the proportionate response of anger and outrage over what's going on in D.C. right now, for the mayor to not be here certainly raises alarms. After we've seen from politician after politician, they find themselves at times like this where it's just better to be here.
Based on what you've been able to assess, how would you say the city overall, various neighborhoods reacting to what has transpired to date?
Well, I think the best example is what we saw around U Street last night, where it wasn't just media and law enforcement that were showing up. It was hundreds of community members trying to redirect people away from this checkpoint and trying to basically shame or shout down some of these officers for doing what they were doing. But I think it comes at a time where there's just not quite a trust there between people who have lived here for a long period of time. When one of these pops up on New Year's Eve or July 4th, where there certainly could be more dangerous actions going on, certainly reasonable. When it's a Thursday night in the district and you're stopping cars and checking for more than just a broken taillight or somebody in an intoxicated driver, arresting people, pulling them out of their cars, pulling mopeds off the street, which is what we've seen all day today, Washington, D.C. police going and arresting drivers of those mopeds. I think it raises a questionable feeling of who is doing what, at whose direction, and for how long this is going to go.
Jake Rosen, thank you very much for answers to some of those questions. I want to invite to the program the Director of the United States Marshal Service, Gaddy Serralta. He joins me from the North Lawn of the White House. He is, as I've instructed, in command and control of this D.C. operation. It's good to have you, sir. Evaluate what's going on.
Thank you for having me.
What's going on and how the information is being fed up to you and how you are assessing how successful or unsuccessful it is being.
So thank you for your question. Thank you for having me here today. The way we assess or we deploy the teams, right? We have 15, 16 different federal agencies, and we utilize intelligence from the Metropolitan Police Department in order to get our folks deployed to the areas, the choke points, the locations where the violence has festered, and that's what we're doing. Now, that's not the only area we're going to be at, because as we all know, when bad guys feel the pressure, they move their operations to areas where the police are not. So as to the gentleman that's there, I will tell you, there's going to be police everywhere in this city.
And when you say everywhere, you mean all of the various wards, not just Northwest D.C., Southeast, Southwest, Northeast, the entire quadrant, but in different days, different evenings, in, I would gather, from a tactical perspective, unpredictable ways.
Correct. But based on intelligence-based deployment.
Okay. And for the audience's benefit, because this is a question we get a lot, how long is this going to last, and how do you measure whether it is succeeding or whether success, however it is defined, and that's maybe another question, how do we define it, is achieved?
Okay, well, I can tell you success, complete success, is there is no more crime in the D.C. area, right? We are trying to make D.C. safe and beautiful again, and that's going to require a lot of work from all law enforcement agencies. We're a united front. We are working together in order to make this happen. The president has ordered it, and he's put together all these federal law enforcement agencies. I can tell you we're well above 25 guns seized from bad guys. Okay, how do you measure how many folks those guns would have killed had law enforcement not intervened? That's very difficult. You're not going to be able to measure that.
Sure,
so,
understood.
There's a lot of great work. Yeah, there's a lot of great work done by these federal law enforcement agents. I'm very proud of the work they've done. We're working very well together, and we're going to get this done.
Mr. Serralta, when the president says no crime in this city, I reminded how I started in this business long, long time ago. 1984. I was a police reporter in a community called Amarillo, Texas, a very homogenous, very cooperative place, population about 160,000. Sir, there was crime in Amarillo. There were murders in Amarillo. There were rapes and robberies. They had a very large police force. They worked very hard all the time. You're never going to have zero crime in an urban environment, even in a cohesive community that's much smaller than the District of Columbia in some place like Amarillo, Texas. So that's not achievable. Zero crime is simply not achievable.
Well, I can tell you this. It's definitely not going to be achievable if we continue the catch and release program that we have, right? We need to stop this cashless bail program that D.C. has, because no sooner than the police officer puts him in the jail, you know, some other police officer, maybe in the same shift, is picking him up for a different crime. And that needs to stop, and that needs to stop now. That's a legislative issue, something that the government here can take up.
Sure, and if they did that, would the necessity for this federal involvement and the federal takeover of the Metropolitan Police disappear?
Well, I would think if we make headway with bad guys staying in jail rather than walking right back out the other side, that absolutely that there will be a de-escalation of our efforts, and D.C. will be much safer.
So should my audience think about this, sir, as a tactic that is trying to achieve a legislative outcome, and once that legislative outcome is sufficiently satisfactory to the president, this will all be backed off?
I think it's a multi-pronged approach, right? There are a number of issues at work here. The president has tasked me with one particular portion of this task that he's bringing about to make D.C. safe and beautiful. And I'm very honored to have been put in charge of this operation. And we're doing great work. And I'm very proud of the law enforcement officers that are here late into the hours, late into the night, you know, away from their families, to make sure that our community's family members are safe.
And when the community itself feels uneasy and feels the need to protest and vocalize their displeasure, how do you react to that? How do you assess that?
I'm going to tell you, nobody protects freedom of speech more than a law enforcement officer. We are pro freedom of speech. However, when a protest turns violent, that's when law enforcement has a problem with that. So we'll deal with it if it were to become violent. In the meantime, we welcome protests, although I find it hard to believe that anybody that lives in this town is going to protest the fact that we're taking bad guys to jail. I just don't believe it.
Gabby Serralta, we'll see how that plays out. I appreciate your time, sir, very much. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Still to come, as President Trump looks to extend his federal takeover of D.C.'s police, homeless people in the nation's capital, will they find themselves caught in the middle? Can California cancel out Texas in the ongoing redistricting fight? Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom and the plans he claims will end the Trump presidency. Plus, our Nancy Cordes is in Alaska, where President Trump plans to meet with Vladimir Putin tomorrow. What the Russian leader had to say just hours ago as he gets ready for that face-to-face. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to The Takeout. White House, of course, is preparing for tomorrow's summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Anchorage, Alaska. Here's the president in the Oval Office earlier.
I think President Putin will make peace. I think President Zelensky will make peace. We'll see if they can get along. And if they can, it'll be great.
Nancy Cordes joins me from Anchorage. Well, Nancy, the president said we'll make peace. He didn't say when. That's a big question. When?
That's true, but right. Well, President Trump has at least some faith, Major, that he will be able to nudge President Putin into some kind of either short-term or long-term peace agreement. He wouldn't be holding this meeting if he didn't have that faith. But he also admitted today that, in his view, there's a 25% chance that these talks tomorrow are a total failure. Now, I would say European leaders would peg the number higher than that. Vladimir Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, said point blank yesterday that he thinks that Putin is bluffing, that he doesn't really want peace, that he is simply stringing the U.S. and the world along as he intensifies his attacks on Ukraine. But Trump says he wants to feel out the Russian president, see if he is open to a deal, open to making peace, and that if he deems that that's the case, then he would be eager to hold another summit in short order that involves not just Putin, but Ukraine's president as well.
Picking up on that, Nancy, I was fascinated by the president's description of that. It might even be there in Anchorage. Are we talking about a potential summit village in Anchorage that goes on for days? Is there any expectation on the ground there that that could actually come to be?
I mean, that would be efficient because, after all, President Trump is going to have to fly 7 hours or so to get here from Washington, D.C. President Putin has to fly 9 hours. And frankly, there aren't that many other places that Putin can safely go right now that would be hospitable for a summit. He's facing, as you know, an arrest warrant for war crimes from the International Criminal Court that severely limits the countries that he can safely visit without getting arrested. He's also facing major sanctions that require the Treasury Department to issue a special license just for him to land here with his team tomorrow. And so, yes, if things go really well, there is a world in which President Trump calls up Vladimir Zelensky and says, hey, why don't you head here too, and we'll all just sit down and talk. But President Trump said there are a few locations where talks like this could play out. And he said if it doesn't happen immediately, that it should happen over the next week or so. But he also said, Major, that if things don't go well, then he's not doing a joint press conference with Vladimir Putin tomorrow. He'll just do a press conference by himself after the meetings and head home and wash his hands of it.
And we will be ready for all of that. Nancy Cordes, thank you so very much. Earlier today, I spoke with former National Security Advisor to President Trump in his first term, Ambassador John Bolton. You might remember there was a few. He was one of them, and he had plenty of thoughts about the summit. Let's listen. John, you have probably grown weary over the years of taking social media abuse from the president. I honestly get weary asking you about it, but there is a context here. The president said, very unfair media is at work on my meeting with Putin, constantly quoting fired losers and really dumb people like John Bolton, who just said that even though the meeting is on American soil, Putin has already won. The president objects to that characterization. How do you defend it?
Well, I think what this summit does for Putin is sets the stage for what he needs to do to Trump, which is getting back under control, getting back under his KGB-trained manipulation. And it manifests itself in a number of ways. Putin is an international pariah leading a rogue state that committed unprovoked aggression against Ukraine. Trump has brought him to an American military base in Alaska and put him in the center of the world spotlight in a picture of the two of them shaking hands that will be on the front page of every paper in the world the day after. That's legitimization that Putin paid no price for whatever. Moreover, the way the summit is structured is there's no Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine. There are no pesky Europeans around. Putin has Trump for a scheduled 4 hours one-on-one to try to work his magic to restore the Donald-Vladimir friendship. And if he does, then he intends to use it to sell his peace plan and for other objectives. Putin couldn't have asked for a better set of circumstances.
And I'm confused, John, maybe you are as well, about what the White House actually says this is about. The president at times talks about a ceasefire. At times he talks about feeling out the situation. At times he talks about taking a temperature. Those seem to be inconsistent and somewhat wayward.
Well, I think there's a story here we haven't heard in full length about how he went from last Friday talking about land swaps and changing Ukraine's constitution to today saying there's a 25% chance it'll be a total failure. I think there's a real miscommunication by Steve Witkoff, his special envoy. I don't think he heard what Putin told him accurately in Moscow. I think they jumped on this summit because Trump saw it as a vehicle to help get his Nobel Peace Prize before they really figured out that what Putin conveyed to Witkoff about his idea for a peace plan for Ukraine represented no change whatever from longstanding Kremlin thinking. And so the chances of there being a breakthrough here, I think they finally began to realize in the White House, were dropping like a stone. That's why they're trying to downplay expectations. Now, anything can happen tomorrow, but the best guess is we won't get much of anything. I think you've already, by the way, seen the beginning of Putin's manipulation of Trump in a statement he issued in Moscow this morning, praising Trump for this effort to achieve peace being serious and energetic. And by going on to say, we've got a lot of things to talk about, talking about the New START treaty expiring next year. Let's talk about strategic arms control, like big powers do, not this little Ukraine stuff. So I think I wish I'd be there in the one-on-one as a fly on the wall. I think Putin's going to lay it on pretty thick.
And to your point, John, Vladimir Putin wants to talk about everything but Ukraine. He wants to talk about economics. He wants to talk about rare earth minerals. He wants to talk about arms reductions, everything but the conflict in Ukraine, which he clearly wants to continue or intends to continue.
Yeah, and the latest is, if I understand the media reports correctly, is Trump saying now it's not. I don't really expect a ceasefire to come out of this meeting. I expect another meeting with Putin and Zelensky. So this is just fine with Putin, despite Trump's threats from a couple of weeks ago. No new sanctions have been imposed on Russia. No new sanctions have been imposed on China for its purchases of oil and gas from Russia over the past 3+ years. Only India has been singled out for secondary sanctions by Trump, and that's had the effect of driving India back toward Russia and back toward China, undercutting years of effort by Americans of both parties to try and bring India closer to the United States. So I think the White House strategy here is obviously not well thought out, and I think Trump could leap at the opportunity to say, let's launch strategic arms negotiations tomorrow. That's our big plus out of this meeting. And that alone would be a reason not to put sanctions on Russia.
And John, help my audience understand what Putin wants to achieve, even if the Ukraine situation is discussed. Essentially, I will take all the territory inside Ukraine that my troops currently occupy, and the Europeans can put a reassurance force there if they want to, but that will just give me time in the sweet by and by to retrofit, rearm, and get ready for the next.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Plus, Trump has already committed that Ukraine can't join NATO. This is very similar. The Russian position is very similar to what J.D. Vance floated during the 2024 election. And if Putin can get Trump buy-in in his plan, maybe make some changes that Trump suggests, and make Trump, in effect, not a disinterested party, but an advocate for the Putin approach, would put Zelensky and the Ukrainians and the Europeans in a very bad position.
What are Zelensky's options looking at all this tomorrow?
Well, I think he's got to make the pitch to the Europeans that they've got to step up their purchases from the U.S. If that's, as J.D. Vance said last weekend, we're not giving anything more to Ukraine. And Trump himself has basically said that they're going to have to buy it, because if he can't get weapons, ammunition, and other military assistance, particularly intelligence, Ukraine's going to be under strain. Russia's 3.5 times their size. They're fighting a war of attrition, and that may be beginning to have its effect on the battlefield.
You know, John, that Zelensky can only say he will give up no territory. He can't say anything else until he's forced to accept that harsh reality. Is it a harsh reality eventually?
I think it is, but look, that's for negotiation. You don't, unless you're Donald Trump, negotiate in public. If I were Zelensky, I'd say exactly what he's saying now. We're not giving up anything.
When this is all said and done and negotiated, as it ultimately must be, what does it look like?
Well, unless we develop a strategy for Ukraine to win, which we didn't do for the last 3.5 years, they're going to have to settle for some readjustments. But it's a terrible lesson to send to the rest of the world, especially to China, that unprovoked armed aggression can succeed.
Ambassador John Bolton, I appreciate the time, sir, as always.
Glad to be with you.
We will have live coverage of all the key moments, whatever they might be, from President Trump's summit with Russian President Putin in Alaska tomorrow. Plus, John Dickerson will anchor the CBS Evening News from Anchorage. DOGE says its cuts are saving tens of billions of dollars. A look at the data shows the numbers, well, they may not add up. We'll look at that more closely next here on The Takeout. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Here's a look at what else we and now you are watching this evening. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says he's planning to open a second ICE detention facility in his state, calling the second one Deportation Depot. DeSantis says the facility will take over a previously closed prison in North Florida. This comes as a federal judge weighs the legality of the first such facility, which some have called Alligator Alcatraz because it is in the Florida Everglades. The FBI has returned this stolen 500-year-old document signed by Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortés to the Mexican government. The 16th century document offers a glimpse into the government of New Spain, which grew to cover a vast stretch of land from modern-day Washington state to Louisiana and Central America. The FBI believes it was stolen between 1985 and 1993. The agency did not say who had it, but said no charges would be filed. I guess we'll just all wait for the podcast to explain it. While the Department of Government Efficiency was created to reduce government spending and says it has, multiple reports suggest that DOGE has overstated how much money it has actually saved or will save in the future. For example, last month, DOGE said it saved $6.4 billion by canceling contracts from the Department of Health and Human Services. CBS News determined the actual savings amounted to $165 million. The numbers are now being reviewed and examined by Politico in this brand new analysis that found many discrepancies. The article's author, Jesse Blazer, joins me now from New York. Jesse, it's great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Of course, it's great to be here.
Walk us through the way to think about what DOGE has represented about its savings and what can be accurately, transparently verified.
Yeah. It's a great question. First of all, something to know about the way DOGE posts their savings. They have a website, doge.gov, where they post terminations for contracts, grants, and leases, where they say, we've canceled these awards and we are saving X amount associated with each of those contracts, grants, and leases. Yeah, I see you've got the page up right there. So in each of those line items, they say, we've saved this many dollars. What we were able to do with this analysis is go to the receipts and the federal spending records and see how much money has actually been put back into the government's hand by canceling these contracts. And it's not anywhere close to what DOGE says it is.
And I read in your article that one way, and I hope this is helpful to the audience to think about this, is let's say you or I get a new credit card, and there's an available balance on that credit card of $20,000. And then a month later, without charging anything, we decide to cancel that credit card. We say to ourselves, hey, man, I just saved myself $20,000.
Exactly. Yes. No, 100%. I'm glad you brought that up. As one of the experts that I spoke with for this story put it in a metaphor, the way DOGE calculates savings is inherently flawed. And that's something that experts have called out from the moment that DOGE started posting receipts on this page. But essentially, the way they calculate it and the way they say they calculate it on their website is they take a contract ceiling, which is something that the government determines that at most for any given contract, this is the most amount we will ever spend for this particular award. But that ceiling isn't at all related to how much the government has actually committed to pay out. That would be the money that if you take out a credit card, you have your $20,000 credit card limit, but let's say you just spend $1,000. That's the money that matters when it comes to savings, and yet DOGE for their baseline is using the equivalent of that credit card limit to say, okay, you know, we had a $20,000 award and we canceled it and we had only spent $1,000 on that award. We've just saved $19,000. And that's the way that that math works, which is why the discrepancy is as large as it is.
Now, clearly, DOGE has induced some people to retire early, leave their federal workforce, has cut back things, has saved some money. It's not as if it hasn't saved any money. And taxpayers have this sort of curiosity about that in general. They also have been been suggested by the president, well, there might be a dividend check based on how much savings occurs. So how much they actually do in reality save matters.
Yeah, totally. And there's lots of different things kind of coming into play there in terms of how much they are totally saving. This particular analysis was only looking at a slice of what Doge's actions are, but we only have transparency into so much that they've done. So we took the biggest chunk that we could, which was looking at contracts. But you're right that in reality, there have been employment cutbacks, they've cut regulations, and there's savings associated, at least according to Doge, with each of those actions. According to their website as of today, they say they have saved $202 billion across the entire federal government. For perspective, out of the claim savings that we looked at for this story, that was only $33 billion of the $202 that they're claiming. So, of course, the savings that we looked at are far from what they have said that it is, but there's plenty of other actions to look into. But I think when it comes to looking at taxpayers and how much they're actually receiving back, even the savings that we found from Doge's activity just from canceling contracts amounted to only $1.4 billion compared to the $33 billion that they've claimed, which is less than 5%. So again, a long way off. But that $1.4 billion from canceling contracts, that money doesn't automatically go back into the pockets of taxpayers. It doesn't reduce the deficit. All it does is it goes back to agencies to use differently. They're required to spend that money as it's been appropriated by Congress. They can't just not spend it without a formal intervention from Congress via rescissions or something similar. So that money doesn't save taxpayers anything, even though that's how Doge frames it. It just can be used differently by the agency. So when it comes to savings and how much that actually impacts a taxpayer, it really depends on what you are defining as savings, what you're defining as spending. And at least for contracts, canceling those does not necessarily make a direct impact on the taxpayer at all, at least not without additional effort from Congress or from the president.
Jesse, stay on this story. I know you will. And when you have more reporting, we'll come back and talk to you. I appreciate it very much.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
California Governor Gavin Newsom announces a redistricting effort to counter the Trump-backed push in Texas, which we've been talking about for the better part of 2 weeks. California Republican Congressman Kevin Kiley joins me next with his reaction, and he's not happy about it. I promise you that. You're watching The Takeout.
Senator Schiff said, Donald Trump, you have poked the bear, and we will punch back. They say don't mess with Texas. Well, don't mess with the great Golden State.
California Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom earlier today, he and Democrats in the state announced they will move forward to redraw their congressional map to counter Republican-led efforts in Texas. California Republican Congressman Kevin Kiley joins me now. Congressman, it's great to see you. The process by which you have to do this, you have to have an election in California to overcome what the voters already decided, which was to have an independent commission draw the lines in California. And you know that better than I do. React to what you heard from the governor today.
Well, I think it's very troubling because, as you said, voters have already decided this. They said, we want to take the power to draw district lines out of the hands of politicians who are inherently self-interested when it comes to drawing the lines that they're then going to run for office in, and put it in the hands of an independent commission. And that's what we have in California right now. It's done the line drawing the last 2 times that we've done it. It's comprised of citizens representing all parties who aren't even allowed to consider politics in the process. And California voters overwhelmingly put that system in place. And just today, a poll came out showing that by 2 to 1, California voters want to keep that system in place. They don't want to revert to the era of partisan gerrymandering. So the fact that the governor is now looking to spend $250 million on a snap-rushed special election that by definition could only succeed if they manage to confuse voters, I think it's exactly the wrong thing for our state right now.
Congressman, speaking of self-interested politicians, some have said you are self-interested because you might be drawn into a more problematic district if this went through.
Well, I'm actually not super concerned about my own seat. I was fortunate to win.
You'd be the first I ever met.
Votes in the last election. Well, I've been fortunate to get support from Democrat, Republican, and independent voters. And so I don't want my district to change. I love my district. I represent, I think, the most beautiful district in the country. But what I'm concerned first and foremost about is the future of democracy in our state, and frankly, the country as well. Because if we see this sort of escalating redistricting war continue to cascade across the country, I think it's going to be total chaos. District lines are going to be shifting. It's going to create great instability, which is why I've introduced legislation in the House that will stop this scheme from moving forward in California, but will also stop similar schemes or similar mid-decade redistricting efforts in every state.
So is it your declaration to Greg Abbott, the Republican governor of Texas, end this, back off, don't do it in Texas so we don't have to go through it in California?
That's what my legislation would do. It would say, let's all just take a deep breath and say, this is not a path that we want to go down. This is not the way that representative government is supposed to work. I mean, we are supposed to redraw district lines after the census at the beginning of the decade. The point is to adjust the lines because population has changed. But when you're doing it smack in the middle of the decade, you don't even have new population data. So the entire thing is about partisanship. It's drawing district lines purely on the basis of partisanship. So my bill would say we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to go back to the way of doing it once a decade. And then furthermore, I think that we need to address this issue of partisan gerrymandering. So I've called upon the Speaker of the House to create a bipartisan commission to end gerrymandering across the country by the time of the next census.
Do you have any sense at all, Congressman, that the Speaker will take you seriously because he is amenable to this because the President of the United States wants it? He wants 5 more seats out of Texas. I'm quoting him directly on that.
Well, this is a matter for the House of Representatives, and I believe we do have a strong majority of members of the House who don't want us to continue to go down this road. I mean, even the representatives from Texas who are Republicans, they weren't a fan of this whole thing because they don't want to see their districts upended. I mean, they've been representing communities in some cases for many years. They've gotten to know the people there. They've gotten to know the issues. Those communities have chosen them as their representative. And then all of a sudden, those communities are going to be tossed out of their district. It's incredibly disruptive. And I think, frankly, it is a symptom of the larger division that has come to really beleaguer politics in this country. That's maybe the one thing that most people can agree on is that political division has become a serious issue. And if we can't even agree on the rules of the game, the rules of the road, sort of the basic parameters of our politics, then I think we're in big trouble. So I think this is a moment for us to maybe take a step back, take a deep breath, and say there's a better way to do things.
Very quickly, the only way you get that bill to the floor, if it doesn't go through committee and the Rules Committee, because the Speaker says so, is to get a discharge petition. Are you prepared to go that route?
I'm prepared to use any and all tools that are available to get a vote on the bill, because I think that the majority would support it. And I think it would spare us from a huge distraction and something that would be very bad for representative government in this country if we continue going down this road. And it would make sure that California does not have the will of its voters overturned, as Governor Newsom is trying to.
Republican Congressman Kevin Carley, I appreciate the time, sir. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for having me on.
President Trump gives Washington's homeless population an ultimatum: accept shelter treatment or go to jail. This potential purge on the streets of the nation's capital sparking concerns among those who advocate for those without homes. That's next. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Welcome to the Conversation Corner. President Trump has made clearing homeless encampments in Washington, D.C. part of his overall crackdown and beautification program, as he calls it. The president has said he would give those impacted, meaning those dislodged, a place to stay far away from Washington, D.C. But it's unclear where they will go, how they will get there, or what's to become of them once they arrive to wherever that place is. Donald Whitehead joins me now. He's the executive director of the National Coalition for the Homeless. Thank you so much for coming in.
And thank you for having me.
So we have a graphic on this. Control room, please call it up. That just shows the trend line since 2020.
Sure.
Down a little bit, but a kind of a persistent problem. Anywhere from 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people without homes in the D.C. area. The implication from the president is that vagrancy is a crime and that they should be swept up and moved someplace else. Do you have any idea what the implications, the hard answers to these very persistent questions will be based on what you've heard from the White House?
Really, we haven't heard very much from the White House about where the question you asked originally, where people will go, what's going to happen to them. We know for sure there's not enough shelter. Congrats to the D.C. shelter service system. They've expanded the shelter to kind of accommodate the need for people right now. But there's not enough shelter. There's not enough mental health beds, and there's not enough substance abuse treatment. So where people go from here, I have no idea. But I know that this action is going to have a negative effect. It's not going to help end homelessness in this city, and I don't think that was the intent. It's actually going to make it worse for people.
Why is it going to make it worse?
So if you move people into jails or there's forced institutionalization, you haven't addressed homelessness because after they get out of those facilities, they're still homeless.
Because eventually they will.
Eventually they will.
Can't keep them there forever.
You can't keep them there forever. And if there's no housing for them before they get in and none when they get out, you haven't done anything to change homelessness. You've actually made it harder for that person. Now they have a criminal record to deal with, which makes it harder to get a housing unit, makes it harder to get a job, and it separates them from the resources that they were already engaged in. So the money you spent for outreach or for any kind of program, it's just out the window.
And in this city or in any urban environment where people see tents springing up, they sometimes have a natural reaction like, where did that come from? And what does that mean? And where did all the tents, when did we become a tent city? Today, you were near the Kennedy Center where there was a bulldozing operation. Tell my audience what you saw.
Well, I saw what we typically see in what I call raids. I don't call them, they call them sweeps, I call them raids. You don't sweep people. So these raids, and this raid today, bulldozers came in, they picked up people's belongings. I saw microwaves and cooking utensils, tents that people lived in, all of their meager belongings. People had to work really hard to get those things. And in a second, they were swept up. Now, luckily this time nobody got killed. So we've seen in Atlanta, we've seen here in D.C., where when they did one of these raids, somebody got picked up in that bulldozer. So, there was a lot of community support for people, making sure that that didn't happen, making sure that those belongings that they did get to gather were still with them once they had to move on to another location.
And to your point, moving on from another location, meaning away from the Kennedy Center, doesn't eliminate the problem. It just moves it to some other locale to be determined, foisting that on that jurisdiction and whatever resources they do or do not have.
And, local communities have already weighed in. I know Montgomery County said, we don't have any more room. So this is not a place where you could move people. The other thing it does, again, I talked about this a little bit. So there are outreach workers, really good outreach workers in the city in Washington, D.C. And those outreach workers are connected. And sometimes those engagements take years. And when you move that person away, those resources are wasted and that engagement is lost and it has to be recreated.
Right. And that connection disappears.
It disappears. And it also puts them in harm's way.
With all sorts of downstream consequences, almost none of them good. Donald Whitehead, I appreciate you coming in very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Anchorage, Alaska, getting ready tonight for a very much anticipated diplomatic summit. President Trump, Russian President Vladimir Putin facing off. Topic, mostly, potentially, probably, Ukraine. All that next here on The Takeout. CBS News streaming will offer live and extensive coverage of President Trump's summit with Russian President Putin in Alaska. Meeting set to begin 3:30 p.m. Eastern. That's 11:30 a.m. in Alaska. The main topic, the war in Ukraine. But they could talk about other things, economic cooperation, arms control, and the like. Here's the president earlier today.
I think President Putin will make peace. I think President Zelensky will make peace. We'll see if they can get along. And if they can, it'll be great.
So I invite you to tune in to CBS News 24/7 for live coverage of the summit. Also, John Dickerson will be in Anchorage and anchor the CBS Evening News at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. That is it for The Takeout today. Stick around. The Daily Report starts right now, and the Padres are still in first place. We thank you.